The Dungeon Master Experience is a series of articles written by Chris Perkins in Dungeon Magazine in 2011. The following readings are his words, and though produced before the current edition, still contains great insights, advice, and tips for Dungeon Masters for any edition, and for that matter, any TTRPG. Boo-hoo. 10/27/2011, Monday night. The heroes find a Nautilus, a Mind Flayer ship beached on the island of Shahadam. The ship's elder brain and crew are dead, killed by a mysterious psychic wave. The DM has just handed the players the means to an end, a ship with which they can infiltrate the Mind Flayer Empire and reach their evil nemesis, Starlord Evandor. Peter Schaefer, who plays a changeling named Metis, discovers that he can operate the shipboard systems if he assumes the form of a Mind Flayer and sticks his tentacles into the pilot's control station. But he still needs the Elder Brain to provide the vessel's motive force. Imagine my surprise when the players hit upon the idea of asking Amazia, their NPC companion and a cleric of Bahamut, to cast an animate dead ritual on the Elder Brain. The heroes are about to learn a painful lesson. Necromantic rituals and undead Elder Brains aren't to be trifled with. Once they realized that they needed the Elder Brain to power the ship, the Monday night players, to their credit, weighed the ramifications of raising it from the dead versus reanimating it. Ultimately, they decided that the undead version would be easier to control, and under normal circumstances, they'd be right. But you can't throw undead Elder Brain at the DM, at least not this one, and expect it to end well. Suffice to say, the Elder Brain was shocked back to life by Amazia's ritual and immediately lashed out at the party. That's more or less how the last game session ended. Next Monday is Halloween, and the game is off because several of my players have other commitments. On one hand, it makes me sad, but on the other hand, I have another week to think about how I'm going to further torment my players. In the spirit of Samhain, this week I fearlessly don my scary DM hat, so take the following advice with several grains of salt. Here's my top 5 list of ways to torture players with specific examples from the Monday night campaign. Torture tip number 1. Give the players what they want, then take it away. It's the oldest, nastiest DM trick in the book, and positively Gygaxian in its fiendish wickedness. Early on in Paragon Tier, my players learned of the Morkoth, a ship moored at the docks of Io Galaroth that was up for grabs. Its captain had been killed and its crew disbanded, leaving the ship ripe for the taking. After ridding the city of evil Kraken-worshipping cultists, the heroes persuaded the city's magistrate to give them the Morkoth for keeps. However, by this time they had made an enemy of an unscrupulous ship captain named Lydia Tarolan, who not only commanded a ship of her own, but also a 30-foot-long iron shark golem. After Tarolan chased them out of Io Galaroth, the heroes decided not to wage a ship-to-ship battle, but instead used phantom steeds to bring the fight to Tarolan on the deck of her own ship. Meanwhile, Tarolan's iron shark golem laid waste to the undefended Morkoth, and it sank into the briny depths. Free ships are great, but players appreciate helpful NPCs even more, particularly likable ones who push obstacles out of the party's way, give them free stuff, or provide wise counsel. Amazia, the cleric of Bahamut, is one such NPC. She receives portentous dreams that warn the PCs of impending danger. She cuts through the bureaucracy of the Dragovar Empire like a knife through a pumpkin, and she provides free healing without complaint. I'm just dying to kill her off, but I'm waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when her loss will be shocking and deeply felt. Or maybe I'll just have her arrested by a political rival on suspicion of treason. Either way, the players won't be able to lean on her anymore. My players also grew to like Lady Thariel von Zarkin, a noblewoman who secretly belonged to a cult of Vecna. Thariel had conflicting loyalties and ultimately decided to use the secret in her possession to help the PCs, so when her superiors told her to dispose of them, she took her own life instead. Torture tip number 2. Reward the players accomplishments with logical negative consequences. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, so the PCs just slaughtered the dragon and took its stuff. What are the odds that the dragon's mother finds out what happened and puts a contract out on them? Pretty good, I think. And what about that evil merchant they killed? Surely the criminals whom he owed large sums of money will want their pound of flesh. Learn a lesson from Greek mythology. For every head the heroes cut off, 2 more grow in its place. In my campaign, the heroes recently befriended the Knights of Arden, a friendly terrorist organization committed to stamping out corruption in the Dragovar Empire. In doing so, they've come to the attention of the Vost Mirage, the Empire's equivalent of MI6. The organization, which itself is riddled with corruption, already has an assassin in the party's ranks, played by one of the players no less, and his buddies are moving in for the kill. This is what happens when you make friends with people who have enemies. Torture tip number 3. Have that light at the end of the tunnel suddenly go out. In my mind, that light at the end of the tunnel is actually a demented will-o-wisp, baiting the players as it leads the characters towards their doom. As the DM, you have the power to make them feel like no matter what they do, they're no closer to reaching their ultimate goal or destination. When dismay sets in, but before the players become thoroughly discouraged and despondent, you shine rays of hope straight into their eyes to dazzle them before plunging them back into darkness. The Monday group desperately wants to end the Mind Flayer threat and live happily ever after, but every time they achieve a victory, Starlord Emendor, their evil nemesis, uses the reality-altering power of an Elder constellation to effect horrendous changes. In one instance, depriving the players of their elemental warship, and another resurrecting an old enemy to confound them and slow their progress. Torture tip number 4. Kill player characters off-screen, and throw their body parts to the other players like scraps of meat to wild dogs. No, I'm not being metaphorical here. That's what I did to Melek, Bruce Cordell's tiefling warlock, when Bruce missed a session. In my campaign, playerless PCs become glorified NPCs, and fuel for storytelling and suspense. When players are absent in my game, their characters typically fade into the background, or if possible, run errands while the other characters tackle the problem at hand. By DM fiat, a guild of slavers managed to corner Melek while the other PCs were adventuring, and at the end of the session they delivered his severed head to the party in a bloody bag. True, Melek was raised the very next session, but the shock value was worth it. Head rolls across the floor and cut to black. See you next week! If you really want to take this idea to the next level, take a dead character and bring him or her back as an undead horror. That's what happened to Nick DiPetrillo's Genasi sword mage, Uriel, when he had his soul devoured by a Death Knight's sword. A helpful lich named Osterneth offered to put an artificial heart in Uriel's corpse and pump necrotic sludge through his dead veins. And though the other players objected, Uriel's wife and first mate, a water soul Genasi NPC named Pearl, was determined to have her darling husband back, and so say hello to Uriel the vampire. Undead Uriel didn't have to survive for many sessions. After dying heroically in battle, he had his heart ripped out, more or less, by a blue dragon sea captain, and Jeremy Crawford's character destroyed the heart with a magic missile to make sure it couldn't be used again. Torture tip number 5. Thrust the PCs into situations they aren't equipped to handle. If I want my players to squirm, I'll put them in a room where their swords and spells avail them not. It might be a room full of politicians discussing the future of the Dragovar Empire, or the hold of a ship containing a sentient Far Realm mine that they must disarm or outsmart before it blows them and their ships to bits. I'm reminded of a particular character moment involving Jeff Alvarez, who plays a highly optimized fighting machine named Kit Valar. The Elf Ranger does outrageous amounts of damage in combat and can practically solo your average encounter, but Jet and Kit Valar are out of their element in non-combat situations. So imagine Jeff's surprise when Kit Valar awakens from his nightly reverie, with blood on his sword and no memories of how it got there, followed by the discovery that he's murdering people in his sleep because the mind flayers put something in his brain. He can't stab the thing in his brain with a sword, at least not without killing himself. So what should he do? That, my friends, is torture. Lessons learned. I'm sure every DM who reads this article can empathize with my primal need to torment my players, and I'm fairly certain I'm not the only DM in the D&D multiverse whose campaign has a sadomasochistic undercurrent. Nothing wrong with giving the campaign an occasional jolt. My players relish the adversity that they and their characters are forced to overcome week after week. The scars they earn along the way will pay off at the end of the campaign, when the surviving PCs gaze at the smoldering ashes of their enemies and realize they've been through hell and withstood the horrors of death, loss, and mutilation. As long as everyone knows it's all in good fun, there's no love lost. And on that note, here's another parting tip I'd like to share. A surefire way to torment your players. Think twice before you throw them a bone. Let the player characters be the instruments of their own demise. My players don't need much help from me to kill off their characters. They're perfectly capable of making ill-informed decisions and rolling a natural 1 on that final death save. When things go from bad to worse, some players expect the DM to jump in and contrive some clever escape for the characters in need, or fudge some dice rolls in the party's favor. Scary DM says, "Mercy is for the weak." Stun them by letting the third consecutive critical hit stand. Terrify them by letting the vicious Death Knight make that coup de grace attack and finish off the party's leader lying unconscious at his feet. My players don't remember the time I cut them slack. They remember the horror of that moment when the Death Knight killed their beloved warlord, while her companions wallowed in their own blood and pooped themselves. Until the next encounter. Also, don't forget to follow the link in the description to pick up my first ever adventure and setting for free on Patreon and DriveThruRPG now. Dive into the desert region of Gondolar as adventurers making their way to the budding city town of Siltpass in search of gold, glory, and answers to the secrets of a long-lost empire. In this first adventure, your heroes will defend the Dune Dancer, a sandcutter airship from a legendary group of bandits known as the Stormbringers. Do you have what it takes to stop the Stormbringers and their bombastic leader Tharok, or will you make a deal with the devil of the sands and join them? Decide your destiny in the first of 6 adventures. TSI, Tharok, Stormbringer, Ironmane.